and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba met at the White House and reaffirmed a strong bilateral alliance. Today we discuss the takeaways from the U.S.-Japan summit for South Korea as President Trump pursues an America First foreign policy.
And we had a good relationship, and I think it's a very big asset for everybody that I do get along with them.
トランプ大統領との間では日米同盟の抑止力、対処力をともに高め、
The world has taken advantage of the United States for many years. They've charged us massive tariffs that we haven't charged them.
In the studio with me, Ambassador James Jeffrey, chair of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Jeffrey was the special representative for Syria engagement and the special envoy for the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Ambassador Jeffrey also served as the deputy national security advisor during the George W. Bush administration. He was also the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Turkey, and to Albania. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as a Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Ambassador Jeffrey, the U.S.-Japan joint statement affirmed the importance of the U.S.-Korea-Japan trilateral partnership in responding to North Korea and upholding regional peace. However, President Trump didn't explicitly say that he respects or will continue the trilateral cooperation which was strengthened under the Biden administration. Do you think during the recent summit, President Trump's will to continue trilateral cooperation has shown? And did you see any indications that President Trump regards South Korea as an important partner in countering China?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I have no doubt that if it is in the communique, everyone, including President Trump, signed off on it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that President Trump doesn't have to mention something that is obviously in his and America's interest and in the interest of the two other countries, Japan and Korea. President Trump is all about letting our partners and allies take the lead, be it in East Asia, Europe, or in the Middle East. I am sure that he's looking forward to continuing the good relations he had with not only Japan, but also South Korea in his next administration.
And Mr. Seiler, during the first Trump administration, there were assessments that the Korean government's balanced diplomacy between Washington and Beijing made it difficult for U.S. and South Korea to closely cooperate. Do you think the future of U.S.-Korea-Japan trilateralism and U.S.-Korea alliance relationship largely depends on the policy of the future Korean government and the political situation in South Korea? Would political instability in South Korea make U.S. and Japan more cautious about pursuing cooperation with South Korea?
Well, I think, as democracies, the United States and South Korea have navigated the bilateral relationship, and now we have this trilateral dimension as political seasons change in both capitals. And, in terms of the current uncertainties in South Korea, but the possibility that a successful and upheld impeachment will lead to some type of election and either an emergence of a ruling party candidate from the PPP or an opposition party candidate becoming president. Of course, our two sides are going to have to sit down, look at our key interests, where they overlap, particularly in terms of North Korea and China, and the role that the trilateral relationship has in dealing with both of these issues. So I have confidence that There'll be a transitional period, but it'll be one in which we can work together to shape each other's views of the threats that we face and come up with solutions. And part of that can be, I think, maintaining trilateral cooperation, regardless of whether the conservatives or progressives would emerge victorious at the end of the upcoming presidential election.
Ambassador Jeffrey, Prime Minister Ishiba said at the post-summit press conference that Japan will make its own decision on whether to increase its defense spending. Prime Minister Ishiba also said that President Trump didn't ask him about increasing defense spending. However, in that same press conference, President Trump said that we look forward to seeing even more defense spending from Japan. Do you think there is a gap in perception on this issue between President Trump and Prime Minister Ishiba? And do you think President Trump looks at Korea and Japan the same way when he thinks about burden sharing?
Well, first of all, he's very much committed to burden sharing. I'm sure in one or another way there was a discussion privately or in the small group on Japan's moving forward, because we know they are moving forward, and that's much applauded in America. I also suspect that sometimes foreign leaders don't like to admit that they're under pressure by an American president. So I think the Japanese Prime Minister handled it well by saying that's our decision, but we all know what the decision has been because it's been announced. And Trump acknowledged that without taking credit for it. So that was well done, I think. No, I do not think that they look at the two countries differently. They're both partners and allies. But of course, as we've discussed here before, South Korea has to focus more on North Korea, and China is its #1 trading partner. Japan, on the other hand, while it has very great concerns with North Korea, is most concerned, as is the United States in East Asia, with China's advances. So there is a slight difference in priority, but I don't think it's important.
Ambassador Jeffrey, in the joint statement, the U.S. reaffirmed nuclear umbrella over Japan, and some have raised questions about President Trump's commitment to a nuclear deterrence over allies. Do you think President Trump will apply the same principle to South Korea?
Absolutely. First of all, it's in America's interest to do so. And the second thing is, as a former soldier, I know any American president is most aware of where he or she has troops on the ground. That is South Korea, even more than in Japan, because the troops in South Korea are closer to the front lines. And there's no way that the president or any president would weaken our nuclear deterrence, not only because of our partner, but also because of the presence of American troops, which is one reason why we keep troops there.
Mr. Seiler, in the joint statement, what is the significance of including resolute commitment to the complete denuclearization of the DPRK? Is this just diplomatic lingo, or is this a substantial policy goal?
I think it's an important realization that true peace on the peninsula only comes with denuclearization of North Korea. There is no laying aside, there's no accepting the nuclear North Korea and moving on. But it remains a top diplomatic goal of the United States, Japan, Republic of Korea, and many countries throughout the world, that we would not abandon the goal of complete verifiable denuclearization in North Korea. A couple of things we need to remember. First of all, the call for CVID, the call for denuclearization, the rhetoric itself is not inherently offensive to North Korea. We're not closing doors to dialogue because we're insisting that it be about denuclearization. Rather, we're clearly defining what everybody knows the top issue on the peninsula needs to be. And so as we go forward, I don't see calls for denuclearization either to be founded in some delusion about a goal that can never be achieved. I do believe we need to continue to push towards denuclearization. And I think we need to be firm in that so Pyongyang understands that this has to be one of the issues that are front and center in any U.S. DPRK dialogue going forward.
But I think this is very important because in other areas, such as Ukraine entering NATO or the Palestinian-Israeli dispute, Trump has shown he's willing to challenge long-standing positions if they're not particularly realistic. The fact that this one, which is a long-standing position and, to be honest, is probably not very realistic, he affirmed that so strongly is an indication that he's very concerned about this issue and he's not going to shake the boats right now, and that's important.
I've been wanting to ask you about this parallel, Ambassador Jeffrey. You're a Middle East expert, and President Trump talked about making Gaza into a Riviera. And President Trump, since taking office 3 weeks ago, also talked about developing North Korea's coastlines with condominiums. How serious is this about this? What is the takeaway for policymakers in Seoul?
Never say it's not serious with President Trump. He wants to do this. The other point he's making is, and it's a broader point, look, what's worked, or what we've done so far and what the current situation is for the people of Gaza, for the people of North Korea, is terrible. We shouldn't just accept it and turn our eyes away. Rather, we should let everybody know there is an alternative. The United States, the international community, is ready, as we've done from Sweden to Singapore, to help countries and populations enter into the same wonderful, prosperous lives we have. And that's the point I think he's trying to make.
Yeah, also, it's interesting because around the 2011-2012 time period where we were engaged in both secret talks with North Korea and the talks that led to the Leap Day understanding, we had a number of companies, I was at the White House at the time, that were looking for a green light from the White House that were interested in investing in North Korea. So the idea that President Trump could go in and develop Wonsan or some other coastal area along the East Coast, I think the president understands this because he had this dialogue with Kim, during term one, and it was boldly or at least broadly rejected. And North Korea has repeatedly said, if you think our weapons are up for sale, that they're just a negotiating card, and that we choose, kind of other economic incentives as the cost for, as a reward for giving up our nuclear weapons, you don't understand why we have nuclear weapons. So I think President Trump is aware of the challenge. We shouldn't, like you said, it's serious. We should not mock these offers. We should not think they're unreal. They would probably be the types of things that would be put on the table in front of the North Koreans should we resume dialogue. But we have yet to see that Kim Jong-un would be interested. Mm-hmm. And so the president's goal, I think, will be to try to lead him down that path.
Ambassador Jeffrey, President Trump has announced a series of new measures that shook up many foreign capitals, but he exchanged compliments with Prime Minister Ishiba, and there were no particular tension between the two. Given the complex East Asian security environment, do you think President Trump considers Japan as one of the most reliable ally in Asia to counter China? And as South Korea regains political stability, will it be able to enjoy the kind of deep trust and cooperation that Japan is currently enjoying?
The short answer, yes. The longer answer is I don't think Trump looks at things of who's more to be trusted, who's more reliable. I think he's going to judge countries by their actions. The only reason he's doing this with Japan first, and it's very important that he's put an East Asian country at the top of his agenda as the new president, that sends a signal in and of itself, is that, quite frankly, Japan is the strongest and biggest militarily and economically partner we have in the Far East. So we start with Japan, but it's a symbol for everybody else from New Zealand to South Korea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you see the trend? I mean, Secretary Hexeth also talked about how United States puts emphasis in China. Do you see, is it pivot to Asia repeat again?
Well, it's never gone away since President Obama. But we heard this in the secretaries and also J.D. Vance's speeches the last several days in Europe. But the administration really wants to negotiate, and find a way forward with China. I think what they're trying to show by this military pivot, Europeans, you take care of Europe because we've got to move forces east. What they're saying is, China, you don't really have a military option. So don't make a mistake. But that's a fallback. What we really want to do is negotiate with you, have common economic, political, and other relations in a new dynamic. And I think that's a good sign.
Mr. Seiler, Prime Minister Ishiba pledged to increase Japanese investment in the U.S. to $1 trillion and to purchase U.S. liquefied natural gas. But given Japan's $68 billion trade surplus with the United States and also Japan's past investments here, were these pledges real new concessions to America, or were these just projects in the pipelines? What is the takeaway for South Korea?
This is, I think, going to be a model by which engagement with other countries, the president will engage in allies and other partners. You know, what is the trade deficit? How much are you spending on national defense? What are you doing to defend yourself? And, you know, what are you doing for America? What are you doing to address the trade deficit? And in each of these cases, leaders are going to have to show up to the table saying, this is why Japan is important. This is what we've done. This is what we're doing to address that trade deficit. Here is where we're investing in the United States. And there will be a yes, but what have you done for me lately dimension to it. But I think it's a dimension that, you know, the president goes in with a very firm, strong commitment. And he's there in listening mode to see what those leaders bring to the table. And there are some lessons to be learned by the Republic of Korea. You've got a little bit of a reprieve, as it were, by not having your full-time president in place. But, you know, going forward, you know, I think Korea's got a solid story in some areas, a lot of investment in the United States, a lot of job creation, but there is still, you can't ignore that, you know, $50-some billion trade deficit and the other areas where, you know, Donald Trump will say you need to do a little bit more on defense spending. There'll be some discussions on burden sharing, but these are all things that I think our two countries can work through, you know, going forward.
And Mr. Seiler, if South Korea's political turmoil continues and if South Korea is passive in countering China, how would that impact coordination of policy with Washington? Some say that during the first Trump administration, because of South Korea's balanced diplomacy between Beijing and Washington, and because of the impeachment of South Korean president then, Washington has sidelined South Korea at the time and pursues stronger cooperation with Japan at the time. Do you think there will be a repeat of that same situation now?
You know, there's always an impression or even a portrayal by media or even by politicians that, you know, the current turmoil or the other side's, you know, foreign policy is putting, you know, ROK interest at risk. And there's always a concern of the United States getting closer to Japan and ignoring South Korea, or even when we engage with North Korea, that somehow there's some Korea passing. And I've seen that over the years. But I think that misses the point, the closeness of our ties that, you know, have been established over 7 decades. So I'm not really concerned that there's a domestic political turmoil that will be a major obstacle to our cooperation going forward. We should, in the upcoming weeks, see the final decision of the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court. After that Constitutional Court decision is handed down, we'll either have the restoration of President Yoon into office, or we'll see another election in 60 days, and then we'll know who the leader is going forward. And I think speculation about foreign policies of the various parties and powers involved and how well they track with the United States is speculative. It's helpful to think about these because there are areas of concern, China, North Korea, but I prefer to have confidence in the process going forward.
Mr. Seiler, if U.S. and Japan's cooperation continues to strengthen, will China see South Korea as the weak link in the trilateral cooperation and apply pressure on South Korea? If South Korea is passive in countering China, wouldn't China like to take advantage of South Korea?
That's a great area of concern. I wouldn't call them the weakest link, that China would see South Korea as the weakest link, but certainly the closest target. China's pressure on South Korea ebbs and flows. It's never completely gone, but it's certainly an area where Beijing perceives it in their interest to try to either weaken South Korea-U.S. relationship on the military side, weaken South Korea economically, as they did with THAAD, use economic coercion and pressure. There's a long history of China trying to influence and pressure South Korea in a way, favorable to China's interests, and there's no reason to think that would stop or slow. And certainly with a growing Japan and, of course, isolation of Japan in the region and separation of Japan, South Korea, trying to drive a wedge there, those will be standing objectives of China. And that is why we will need to cooperate going forward so much. I would say that, when the challenge in looking at potential policy orientations of going forward in South Korea is that if a scenario unfolds where the opposition party comes into power, they'll be picking up pieces of a foreign policy that is very different from when they left. This is not 2018, 2019 time period. This is not the pre-COVID kind of diplomatic honeymoon that we had. North Korea has changed, become much more dangerous. China has changed and has become much more dangerous. And again, I'm very confident whoever ends up in power in South Korea will be seeking to do what's best for as they perceive it, the interests of South Korea. And I think it'll be inevitable that the United States and Japan can reinforce with any new leadership, should we have a new leadership, the value of trilateral cooperation in countering both the North Korea threat and the China threat.
I agree. South Korea, by maintaining a very powerful army to counter North Korea, is relieving us. Only 2% of our total military forces are committed to South Korea's defense, and Japan to focus on China. So at least indirectly, the South Korean military contribution to the overall security and our ability to mobilize forces, U.S. and Japanese, against China is multiplied by what South Korea is doing, and everybody recognizes that.
And Mr. Seiler, you talked about the THAAD, Chinese retaliation. Having had that experience, do you think South Korea is better prepared for similar retaliation from China? And do you think, having had that experience, United States will be more willing to proactively help with South Korea?
Those are great questions. China is aggressive. China is intimidating. I remember, because I was involved both at the White House and subsequently as special envoy through that whole period of the tension over THAAD. And, at first the Chinese were somewhat understanding of our argument that, the growth of the North Korea threat, nuclear and missile threat, demands that we take measures such as this. They're not directed towards China, they're directed towards North Korea. Some head nodding initially, but then when they began to see some questioning of, particularly in South Korea, are we offending China by doing this? China is expressing these concerns. And when we began to see some wavering in the deployment, the support to the troops on the ground running the site, China smelled blood. They tasted blood, and they went full force after South Korea. And it was difficult at that point to kind of, protect the Lottes of the world who were losing billions of dollars. But going forward, you just have to have a strong commitment to stand up in front of China, to have confidence that South Korea can speak as a power defending its interests in the face of what will be inevitable Chinese pressure and blackmail, and also to partner with both Washington and Tokyo in standing up to Beijing. It can be done.
Ambassador Jeffrey, President Trump imposed 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, eliminating country exceptions and quota deals that South Korea had previously enjoyed. How should South Korea recalibrate its trade policies and diplomatic approach to the United States? And what is the takeaway from Australia's exemption request to President Trump?
Well, first of all, South Korea should try the same route as Australia. And secondly, ensure that this is at the center, as I'm confident it will be, of discussions between the two leaders. But it will have to be discussions behind closed doors. Trump cannot be seen to be openly making concessions to one partner when he's being tough on others. But I'm not too worried that we will have a trade war with South Korea.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Seiler, Ambassador Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.